Those are the words that echo in my mind every time I look back at the life I built, the life he tried to destroy, and the woman I became because of him. My name is Arya, and for a long time I believed love was meant to heal. I believed it was patient, kind, and forgiving. But Cassian taught me that love can also be cruel, manipulative, and destructive when placed in the wrong hands. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. We were young, ambitious, and unstoppable. Two dreamers chasing the same horizon. Cassian was charming, the kind of man who could walk into a crowded room and make everyone believe they mattered. He made me believe I was special, that I was the center of his world. We built a life together from scratch. Long nights spent planning our future, laughing over cheap dinners, and dreaming about the kind of home we would one day have. For years, I was blind to the truth hidden behind his smile. I didn't know that the same hands that held me so tightly would one day be the reason I almost lost everything. Cassian and I had started a small architectural firm together in London. It was my dream, but he was the one who pushed me to make it real. We were partners in every sense, in business and in love. I handled the designs, the creativity, while he took care of the clients and the deals. It felt like a perfect balance, a partnership made in heaven. Or so I thought. I remember the early days vividly, the excitement of landing our first big project, the late nights working side by side, the way his eyes would light up whenever he looked at me. Everyone admired us. We were the couple people envied, the pair that made success look easy. I thought we were untouchable. What I didn't realize was that Cassian's ambition had a darker side, one that thrived on control and deceit. I was too in love to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface, too blinded by devotion to see that the man I trusted most was already planning his betrayal. It began with little things, the kind you dismiss because love teaches you to make excuses. He'd hide phone calls, change passwords, and disappear for meetings that ran too late. When I asked questions, he'd smile and say, "Arya, you overthink everything. Trust me, I'm doing this for us." And I did trust him, even when the pit in my stomach told me something was wrong. Love can make you deaf to your own instincts. One night, I stayed late at the office finishing a design proposal when I saw an email pop up on his computer. The subject line read, "Our agreement." I opened it, and in one short paragraph, my world shifted. Cassian had been negotiating a deal behind my back, a deal to sell our company under his name alone. My name wasn't even mentioned. The man I built everything with was about to take it all from me, my business, my dream, and my dignity. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, feeling my chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages between him and the investor, messages that revealed not just betrayal, but premeditation. He had been planning this for months, manipulating me into signing documents I didn't even realize were transferring ownership. I felt sick. Every memory, every touch, every word of love turned poisonous in that moment. I wanted to confront him, scream, demand answers, but something inside me told me to stay quiet. For the first time in my life, I didn't react. I observed. I studied him. I decided that if Cassian wanted to play this game, I would learn the rules and beat him at his own. The following weeks were torture, but they were also my awakening. I smiled when I wanted to scream, kissed him goodnight when I wanted to leave, and went to work pretending nothing was wrong. Every day I watched him, memorizing his moves, his lies, and his arrogance. He truly believed I was still his obedient partner, still the woman who'd never question him. That was his first mistake. The more I learned, the colder I became. I wasn't just planning to save what he tried to steal. I was planning to take everything he valued and make him feel the same powerlessness he made me feel. I would let him finish his game, because when I finally made my move, it would be checkmate. Cassian had no idea that every smile I gave him was a mask. Every "I love you" a lie carefully placed to keep him comfortable in his delusion. In his mind, he was already free from me, the successful architect with charm, ambition, and a brand new future, unbothered by the woman he'd built his empire beside. But in mine, he was already a ghost walking through the ruins of the life he tried to steal. I began to prepare quietly. I studied the firm's finances, memorized client contracts, and made copies of every document I could find. He had transferred our company assets into an offshore account under his name, but what Cassian didn't know was that he'd left a trail, small details that only someone who truly knew him could recognize. I watched him type in his passwords when he thought I wasn't looking, learned his patterns, and within days, I found a way into his secret files. My heart pounded as I opened them, the truth pouring out like poison, fake invoices, false signatures, and a plan to make me look incompetent so I'd be forced out quietly. I realized then that Cassian wasn't just betraying me. He was erasing me. The betrayal cut deeper than I imagined. Every moment I spent in that office felt like living inside a lie. The man I once trusted with my heart had crafted a world where I was disposable. He'd always told me he loved my creativity, but in his eyes it was just another tool to use. I started seeing patterns in everything he said. The way he'd belittle my designs in front of clients, claiming he was just refining them, or how he'd cut me off in meetings with that charming laugh everyone adored. I had mistaken dominance for confidence and control for protection. Now I saw him for who he truly was, a coward hiding behind success. But I didn't let anger consume me. I let it sharpen me. I stopped being the woman who waited for an apology and became the woman who wrote her own redemption. It wasn't long before I started building alliances quietly. Our assistant Lila had always admired my work and sensed something was wrong. One evening, when Cassian had left early for another one of his business dinners, I asked her to stay late. I told her everything, not the emotions but the facts. The documents, the deals, the lies. At first she was terrified, but when I showed her the proof, she looked at me with quiet determination and said, "Let's make this right." Together, we began collecting evidence. Contracts Cassian had forged, money he had hidden, and emails that would destroy his perfect reputation. I moved like a shadow, careful not to trigger suspicion. Cassian was clever, but he underestimated me because, in his eyes, I was still the woman who'd crumble without him. Outside of work, Cassian's behavior became more erratic. He grew colder, distant, and strangely impatient. It was as if he was trying to force me out faster, to make me break before his plan fully unfolded. He started planting seeds of doubt in our mutual friends, telling them I was struggling with the stress of work, that I wasn't thinking clearly. I watched as people I'd trusted began to avoid me, and I realized Cassian wasn't just taking my business. He was taking my credibility, my name, my world. But while he played his petty games, I was creating something far more powerful. Every file I gathered became a weapon. Every lie he told became a piece of my strategy. And every time he smiled that fake, confident smile, I told myself, not yet. The night everything began to shift was cold and silent. One of those evenings where the city lights felt heavy and the air smelled like rain. Cassian came home later than usual, his tie loosened, his phone in his hand, smirking as if he had won something only he understood. He poured himself a drink and sat across from me, his tone calm but distant. "Arya," he said, "maybe it's time we take a break from each other and from the firm. You've been off lately. I think you need rest." His words dripped with manipulation, but I smiled and said softly, "You might be right." Inside, my heart burned with cold fury. That was the moment I knew my plan was ready. Let him think he'd broken me. Let him believe he'd won. Because when I finally revealed the truth, Cassian wouldn't just lose the company. He'd lose the one thing he valued most, his image. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house felt heavy with secrets. The ticking clock echoed like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and cruelly loud in the silence. Cassian lay beside me, breathing steady, as though guilt had no weight. I turned toward him, studying his face in the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. His jawline, his calm expression, everything about him screamed peace. But I knew it was the kind that came after betrayal, not innocence. I whispered his name softly, just to see if he'd flinch. He didn't. That made my heart ache even more. The next morning, I decided to find the truth myself. I followed his car, keeping a safe distance. He drove toward the outskirts of the city, a quiet area with old warehouses and workshops. My pulse raced. Then I saw her, the same woman from the gallery. She ran up to him, smiling too easily, her hands resting on his chest as if they belonged there. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. They went inside one of the buildings, and I waited for what felt like hours. When he finally came out alone, I followed him home, my mind racing through every possibility. Maybe there was an explanation, I told myself. Maybe I was wrong. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. That very evening, a message appeared on our shared tablet. "I miss you already," it read, followed by a heart emoji. My world tilted. My hands trembled as I stared at those words glowing against the dark. He noticed me reading it. His face froze, then twisted into panic. "Arya, it's not what you think," he said, his voice cracking. But I was done listening to empty words. "Then what is it, Cassian? Tell me what it is." He hesitated, searching for a lie strong enough to hold us together. "She's just a client." "It's complicated." I laughed bitterly. "A client who sends you hearts at midnight?" He didn't answer. That silence said more than words ever could. The next few days passed like a blur. He tried to act normal, cooking breakfast, leaving flowers on my desk, even offering to take me out. But love forced isn't love restored. It's pity disguised as affection. I began documenting everything quietly. Messages, calls, his erratic schedule. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it, but I knew one day it would matter. My best friend, Leona, noticed my withdrawal and came over unannounced one evening. "You're not yourself, Arya," she said softly. "What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, but words felt like betrayal of my own dignity. So I smiled and said, "Just tired." But she didn't buy it. Later that night, when she left, she slipped me a small recording device. "You don't need to confront him until you're sure. Record, don't react." I stared at the tiny black gadget, my stomach turning. I didn't want to become someone who spied. Yet betrayal has a way of turning even the gentlest heart into a strategist. Days later, Cassian left for another business meeting. I placed the recorder under the seat of his car. When he returned that night, I felt my chest tighten as I retrieved it after he slept. I sat alone in the kitchen pressing play. His voice filled the room, calm, familiar, but the words that followed tore me apart. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said, and then a woman's laugh followed. "You said you'd tell her soon," the woman replied. "I will," Cassian answered. "Once the money clears, I'll make my move." I dropped the recorder, my breath shallow. The money? What money? My world cracked open. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was planning something worse. The house, the investments, even my inheritance, all tied under his name since our marriage. The realization hit like a thunderclap. I wasn't his partner. I was his plan. But instead of collapsing, something inside me awakened. Cold, sharp, deliberate. The tears stopped. My hands steadied. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "You chose the wrong woman to play." That night, I didn't sleep out of sadness. I stayed awake, crafting the calmest kind of vengeance, one that would unravel him slowly, silently, and completely. The morning after I heard that recording, something inside me changed forever. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even confront Cassian. I just smiled at him across the breakfast table as if nothing had happened, watching him talk about his meetings and deadlines with that smooth, confident voice he always used to manipulate truth. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work, and as the door closed behind him, I whispered under my breath, "Your time begins now." I began by quietly reclaiming my power, the one I had unknowingly handed him over the years. I went through every document, every bank account, every shared asset. I realized he'd been transferring small sums into another account, one under his name only. He must have thought I'd never look closely, but I did. I spent that entire week copying records, backing up messages, saving receipts, and securing my personal finances. Then I visited my lawyer, a discreet man who owed me a favor. I told him I suspected financial fraud and asked for every possible legal route to protect myself without alerting my husband. He agreed to help, saying quietly, "If he's hiding money, we'll find it." When Cassian came home that evening, he found me making dinner, humming softly. He didn't suspect a thing. He looked at me with a kind of distant guilt, perhaps wondering if I knew. I gave him no reason to think I did. I became his mirror, calm, affectionate, and unbothered. But beneath that serenity, my mind was spinning webs. I learned that the woman, her name was Delilah, was not just some random lover. She was an investor connected to one of Cassian's upcoming projects. Together, they planned to secure funds, then disappear to another country. My stomach turned every time I thought of it, but I turned that pain into precision. I tracked Delilah's business online, followed her movements through social media, pieced together timelines. Every post, every tag, every photo with Cassian's subtle presence in the background became ammunition. Weeks went by, and he continued his act, bringing me small gifts, pretending to care, while I played the perfect wife. One evening, as he showered, I checked his phone and found a string of messages. "It's almost time. She won't know until it's over." After this, "We'll be free!" The word free made me laugh bitterly. Free from me? Or free from the mask he'd worn for so long? I copied the messages, sent them to my private email, and deleted every trace. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, calm, collected, unrecognizable. I realized revenge didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered in perfect silence. Soon I began leaving subtle clues for him to find: a misplaced file, a half-open drawer, a look that lingered too long, just enough to make him wonder if I knew something. He started losing sleep, growing restless. He'd ask strange questions like, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I'd just smile and say, "Of course. Everything's perfect." But paranoia eats faster than guilt. Within days, he started checking his own messages twice, deleting things, hiding documents. He didn't realize his panic was exactly what I wanted. When the day came for his final meeting with Delilah, the one that would supposedly secure his future, I followed discreetly. He entered a luxury hotel downtown, carrying a briefcase full of forged signatures and documents he planned to use to access the funds in my name. I stayed in the shadows, my heart steady, watching as he met Delilah in the lounge. They were confident, laughing, sipping champagne. That's when I sent an anonymous tip to the bank's fraud department and to a local journalist I trusted, attaching every file, every recording, every message I'd gathered. I didn't need to confront him. I just needed the truth to find him before I did. An hour later, chaos unfolded. Security officials entered the room, asking questions, pulling documents, demanding explanations. Cassian's face turned pale. Delilah tried to leave, but officers blocked the exit. I watched from afar as the man who once called himself my protector crumbled in public. I didn't wait to see more. I walked out, stepping into the cool evening air with a strange calm that felt like rebirth. When I returned home, I began packing, not out of fear, but liberation. Later that night, my lawyer called. "Arya," he said, "the authorities are investigating him. You did the right thing, but be ready. This isn't over yet." I hung up, staring out the window at the quiet city lights. No, it wasn't over. This was just the beginning of Cassian's unraveling and the beginning of my freedom. The night was unnervingly quiet when I returned to the house Cassian and I once called home. Everything looked exactly the same. The minimalist decor, the scent of sandalwood he loved, the picture frames of smiles that had long turned to lies. Yet something had shifted. The silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt earned. I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat on the couch, waiting. I knew he'd come. He had nowhere else to go. And when the door finally opened around midnight, I didn't even flinch. Cassian stepped inside, disheveled, the collar of his expensive shirt wrinkled, eyes wild and hollow. He looked smaller, weaker, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. "You," he began, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You did this." I tilted my head slightly, taking a calm sip of wine. Did what, Cassian? Expose the truth? You did that all by yourself. He laughed bitterly, pacing the floor like a trapped animal. You've destroyed everything. My company, my reputation, my life. No, I interrupted softly. You destroyed those the moment you decided I wasn't enough. He froze, staring at me, as if realizing for the first time that the woman before him wasn't the same one he had manipulated for years. Arya, listen, I can fix this, he stammered, walking closer. We can fix this. I made mistakes. Mistakes? I stood up, setting my glass aside. You call months of lies, betrayal, and theft mistakes? You would have left me penniless, humiliated, a ghost in my own story. My voice didn't rise, but each word struck like glass shattering between us. Cassian's mask finally cracked. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought she cared about me. But she ran. She took everything. I almost felt pity. Almost. So now you know how it feels, I said. To trust someone who only saw you as a means to an end. He sank into the armchair, head in his hands. What happens now, Arya? He whispered. Now, I replied, you face the consequences. I walked to the side table and picked up an envelope. Inside were copies of every document I'd turned over to the authorities, his fake signatures, fraudulent transfers, and voice recordings. I placed them in front of him. They'll be here soon, I said quietly. You might want to finish your glass of water while you wait. His eyes widened as he realized what I meant. You called them? Of course. You always said you believed in accountability. Tonight you'll learn what it really means. For the first time in years. He looked afraid, not of losing me, but of losing the illusion of control he'd built his life upon. Outside, the faint sound of sirens began to rise, cutting through the night air. Cassian stood up, desperate. Arya, please. I can't. This will ruin me. I looked at him one last time, and in that moment, every memory, our laughter, our plans, our love, flashed before me. But those moments belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. You ruined yourself the moment you thought I'd stay silent, I said, turning away as red and blue lights flickered through the curtains. Officers knocked moments later. I didn't look back when they let him out in handcuffs. His last words, faint and broken, followed me down the hall. I loved you. I paused only long enough to whisper, then that was your first mistake. Thinking love could survive your lies. Days turned into weeks, and the world began to move on without him. The news painted Cassian as a fallen businessman caught in his own web of deceit. People speculated about the mysterious woman who exposed him, never realizing it was the same woman who had once worn his ring. I rebuilt quietly, focusing on the life he'd tried to erase. I reopened my small art studio, poured my emotions onto canvas, and found solace in color and creation. Each brushstroke was freedom, each piece a fragment of my healing. One evening, I stood before a painting, a stormy seascape with a single figure standing calm amid chaos. I titled it The Last Mistake. It sold within hours, but I didn't care about the money. That painting was my closure. Months later, I received a letter from Cassian's lawyer. Inside was a short note written in his handwriting. You were right. I didn't lose you the day you exposed me. I lost you the day I stopped deserving you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to understanding. Sometimes peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from surviving it. And so when people ask why I never remarried, why I still wear the faintest trace of that old gold ring on a chain around my neck, I simply smile and say, because once I was his first love. But to this day, I remain his last mistake. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. Subscribe to Revenge Unveiled and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story of love, betrayal, and redemption.